Hey, welcome to Friends Win Ties. It's your boy WillJ, and today we're going to be doing some deck brewing shenanigans. But over here, we don't necessarily go for the most powerful or most tuned way of building a commander deck. Our focus will be on interaction, synergy, and yeah, winning the game, but hopefully, more importantly, winning over some friends. What does that mean? We're likely not going to be going down the path of heavy stacks, heavy control, or easy Britney combos. What are those? The ones that make you say, oops, I did it again. We will also be going over deck themes and how to build and potentially pilot the deck, some low, mid, and high budget options, and we'll end with deck stats of a real-life, play-tested, and piloted deck. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, leave a comment, and subscribing would be appreciated in the most ecological way possible. And with that, let's get to it! Today we'll be featuring one of my favorites from MTG lore, the Vampire Lord responsible for Isan Shade, Baron Sengir. Or in this case, his latest iteration, Sengir, the Dark Baron from Commander Legends. I've always thought Baron Sengir was such a cool character and I've always wanted to play him, and this updated version of him is actually pretty fun. His card reads Sengir the Dark Baron, he costs 4 and a black, legendary creature vampire noble. He's a 4/4 with flying, and whenever another creature dies, put 2+1/+1 counters on Sengir the Dark Baron. Whenever another player loses the game, you gain life equal to that player's life total as the turn began. And partner. If we're running with Sengir as our commander, we need to recognize the role he plays in our deck. He is the ultimate payoff for all the sacrifices we make and every creature we destroy. He is the game ender, the top curve finisher, our opponent's final boss. But what he doesn't do is pretty much any menial task in enabling our deck to do anything. If anything, we need to serve him. So props to Wizards on the flavor win, and fortunately for us, he has the partner clause, which means we can get someone, another commander, to help us out with the day-to-day of, carrying out his evil plans. So comes the question, who do we partner him with? Commander Legends gave us a lot of choices. Jeska Thrice Reborn for that triple damage, Kedis for that spread the love damage, Faltis for the extra evasion, Kodama for Fun Town Value Town. But I personally would recommend another awesome character from MTG's past, Tevesh Sat. Tevesh Sat, Doom of Fools, is a planeswalker that reads 4 and a black legendary planeswalker Sat. He starts out with 4 loyalty, and we can +2 him to create 2/0/1 black thrall creature tokens. +1, you may sacrifice another creature or planeswalker, and if you do, draw 2 cards, then draw another card if the sacrifice permanent was a commander. -10, gain control of all commanders, but all commanders from the command zone onto the battlefield under your control. Tevesh Sat, Doom of Fools can be your commander and partner. Tevesh Sat fills up the holes in Sengir's gameplay. Sure, he's got no punching power, and we're likely never going to be able to resolve that ultimate, but that second ability, it means he's a sacrifice outlet to fuel Baron Sengir, and more importantly, he draws us some cards. You don't even need to sacrifice Baron Sengir to him to get maximum value. Getting 2 cards for a random token is pretty great value. Having a card draw engine in the command zone will help our deck run a lot smoother and set us up for the end game. If Tevesh Sat is outside your budget, you can also opt for Keskit the Flesh Sculptor. While he's obviously not as good or as consistent, he is a lot cheaper price-wise, and he's still a sacrifice outlet and still helps us draw extra cards throughout the game. So with our commander chosen, his partner chosen, let's get into deck themes. The big theme we're running here is sacrifice. Both of our commanders feed off of it. The primary win con is to get Sengir on board and then sacrifice and destroy enough creatures for him to be able to swing in for lethal. But until then, we need to make sure we have enough gas to get there, in which we can leverage on Tevesh Sat's card draw. So knowing this, the specific card themes we will run are our standard themes of ramp, removal, and draw, but afterwards, we'll get into more specific themes for our deck: token and fodder, reanimation, protection, and something we call UBP or utility bombs and pets. Getting into specifics, let's look at budget tiers. For ramp, because we're in mono black, it doesn't mean we need to lean all the way into artifact ramp. Yes, we probably still want Soul Ring, Arcane Signet. These generally come with the new Commander products now. Charcoal Diamond was part of Commander Legends as a common, and it's a 2-mana value artifact that produces black mana. And if you have something like a Star Compass or Cold Steel Heart or other 2-drops, those work too. 3-drops like Commander Sphere or Spectral Searchlight actually work fine, contrary to what a lot of people say that every mana rock should ideally be about like a 1 or 2-drop. I say this because our commanders have a mana value of about 5 and 6 anyway, so we have a bit of time to ramp into them. Dark Ritual is actually another solid option, and yay for you if you recently picked one up with some sick mystical archive art. However, because we want to sacrifice things, we should look into including Priest of Forgotten Gods. There's a lot of text in that card, but in this deck, trust me, it will be a powerhouse. It removes creatures, draws a card, and most importantly, ramps us. Solemn Simulacrum has been reprinted a bunch of times recently, and it fits well into this deck. It ramps us, and it'll draw us a card later on when we sacrifice it. Black also has creatures that ramp with death, like Sifter of Skulls, Pawn of Ulamog, and Pitiless Plunderer. These creatures read fairly similar in that they'll make mana for us if we sacrifice creatures or if our creatures die. What makes Pitiless Plunderer more expensive is that it creates treasures even when tokens die, whereas the other two only give you value if you sacrifice non-token creatures. A pet card of mine that in my experience has done a ton of work is Soldevi Adnate. It fits into the sacrifice theme, gives us mana, and I honestly wouldn't be too hesitant giving up any creature in this deck not named Sengir, especially if it sets us up for a big turn. Some powerful ramp options that I purposefully don't run are Phyrexian Altar and Ashnod's Altar. Because we're running so much fodder, and we'll get to that theme later on in this video, I think the potential is a bit too high for friendly casual tables. We're not running a combo deck, so we likely won't be able to win the game on the spot, but we could be looking at like an 8 to 10 mana turn by like turn 4, and I don't know, in my opinion that could be a little too degenerate. This is actually also why I don't run mana doublers like Cryptghast or Nirkana Revenant, because in a casual setting, these ramp you pretty hard if you're able to untap with them. Plus, they kind of fall into that awkward category of creatures you don't really want to sacrifice, and for me, I don't know, those are just the type of creatures I don't want to run in this deck. For removal, there are so many options in Mono Black, so how do we choose which ones to go with? For starters, Feed the Swarm should be a Mono Black EDH staple. It's sorcery speed, but the versatility with enchantment destruction is just too good. Definitely find yourself a copy. I'd also run either a copy of Nev's Disc or Oblivion Stone for backup, just in case you need to deal with non-creature threats. I like Oblivion Stone more, mainly because it comes in untapped. I'd also run some Edict or Sacrifice effects too, like Sat's Will and Soul Shatter. These are a couple of new cards and they get around Shroud, Hexproof, and Indestructible. They have a clause built in too that requires our opponent sacrifice their creature with the greatest power, meaning we'll likely be hitting our opponent's biggest, most Voltroned up creature. But speaking of sacrifice, I'd actually not lean too heavily on the Fleshbag Marauder package. I'd bring maybe just one. The reason is, this isn't a dedicated Reanimator deck, so these Fleshbag effects usually end up a lot less impactful than what we want. Still on staples, we should run a couple of instant speed removals, and you can choose based off of whatever you have in your collection. We don't need to go super premium on this as there are a lot of solid cheap options for Mono Black. Poison the Cup is a good budget choice. Drag to the Underworld is solid as well. Slaughter Pact was reprinted in Time Spiral Remastered, and another great card that gives you a friend is Baleful Mastery. That said, I'd only run a couple of these because you don't want to flood yourself with instants. Sengir and Sat work better with a heavy creature deck, so creatures with removal stapled onto them are the way to go. Ravenous Chupacabra kills any creature, as does something like a Jarl of the Forsaken. I honestly like Kumbaj Witches. You and an opponent can tag team to kill a creature with 2 toughness, or kill a pair of 1 toughness utility creatures. Teamwork's always fun, and with the mana value of double black, this card is probably only going to be able to see play in a mono black deck. If your budget allows, I'd also run Cavalier of Night. If the sacrifice outlet kills a creature and when sacrificed, replaces itself with one of your utility creatures below 3 mana value, like a Soldevi Adnate, or a Priest of Forgotten Gods, or even Kumbaj Witches. I'd also include Massacre Worm, because even though we're going to be making a lot of tokens and fodder, our deck does not really go wide enough to be able to contain aggressive token decks. So Massacre Worm is a good kill switch just in case. Some removal options that I think are particularly synergistic with this Sengir build are Crypt Rats, Last Laugh, and Massacre Girl. Crypt Rats is mass removal for when you need it, and it can kill your tokens for when you need it too. And since it's an activated ability, you can stagger these activations on the stack. What do I mean? Let's say you have 6 mana and therefore you can kill 6 toughness creatures and below. You can stagger it so that you activate it for 3 mana first, and then in response, before that ability resolves, you activate it again for 2 mana, then in response activate it again for 1 mana. When the abilities resolve, it kills all 1 toughness creatures first, and it feeds all those deaths to Sengir. Then the 2 damage resolves, feeding Baron Sengir again, then the 3 damage. So what I described still pretty much kills all 6 toughness creatures and below, however Baron Sengir's 4/4 body will likely survive it because he grows with the creature deaths happening in between. Last Laugh is an enchantment that kinda does the same thing. You don't even need to spend mana to get it to activate. Once you sacrifice a token, odds are you will get the ball rolling. Stack your triggers properly, and Baron Sengir will get bigger before the damage resolves, and hopefully, by the end of it, you are facing down empty boards against a Baron Sengir who will have the Last Laugh. Massacre Girl is another creature that does a similar trick, although she does temporarily make Baron Sengir smaller. But she wipes the board in a staggered way, and if you stack your triggers properly, it can leave your Baron alive to witness the massacre happening before him. Some powerful removal options that I purposefully don't run are Grave Pact and Dictate of Erebos. I know this might sound crazy or counterintuitive, but I generally find them a bit too consistent and a bit too oppressive. And as enchantments, they're really hard to remove. If we were to run a similar effect, I recommend running Butcher of Malakir instead. As a 7-drop, he is costed to be a game ender. Plus, he's a creature, so feels fairer, right? Because he's easier to remove. Grave Pact and Dictate also tend to host aggro players hard, especially if they're dependent on having a lot of things on board. So one reason I don't recommend playing those cards is these 2 enchantments can completely shut down someone else's deck. Plus, if there's a combo player on the table, you might find yourself needing the help of that aggro player and applying some pressure. For card draw, we're in our wheelhouse. If you have a high budget option available for you like Phyrexian Arena, go for it. It works, and there's a reason it's a staple. But if you don't, there are a ton of great options too. Viscera and Woe Strider are instant speed sack outlets that give us card selection. Don't underestimate Scry, I am telling you. Liliana Standard Bearer is also an awesome card for this deck. It's a 3 mana value 3/1 creature that reads, when Liliana Standard Bearer enters the battlefield, draw X cards where X is the number of creatures that died under your control this turn. This counts tokens and non-tokens, and unlike most black card draw, this doesn't even cost you life. Furthermore, at 3 mana value, if even 2 to 3 creatures die, it's already worth it. Do not hold this thing in your hand waiting for like 10 of your creatures to die or something. At 2 to 3 creatures dying, that's already solid value, especially at instant speed. At 4 or more, that's an insane amount of value. Ayara is also another sack outlet, and she lets us draw. Some other good budget sack outlets are Vampiric Rites and Plumb the Forbidden. Vampiric Rites gives us a lot of value over the course of a game, especially since this can be activated at instant speed, while Plumb the Forbidden lets us draw in one big burst. Much like Liliana Standard Bearer, even sacrificing 2 creatures to draw 3 cards for a mana value of 2 at instant speed is already a powerful effect. Don't let this sit in your hand just because you want to save up enough creatures to draw out your entire deck. A couple of solid options that help us draw without being sack outlets are Smothering Abomination and Midnight Reaper. They reward us for sacrificing creatures. Smothering Abomination is a 4 mana value creature that lets us draw whenever we sacrifice any creature including itself, while Midnight Reaper is a 3 mana value creature that lets us draw and deals us 1 damage whenever a non-token creature we control dies, including itself. I particularly like these 2 creatures because they count themselves. Take another card like Grim Haruspex. On the surface, it looks like a better Midnight Reaper because it costs the same and you don't even lose life. But that another clause on it can actually make a difference. If you've got a slightly higher budget, you can go for Dark Prophecy and Skull Clamp. These two will be all stars because they will draw us a ton of cards over the course of a game. With Skull Clamp, you can even equip it to a creature with 2 toughness and then sacrifice it to like Tevesh Sat. So that way you draw 2 cards from Sat and 2 cards from the Clamp. If you've got that budget, Big Daddy Yawgmoth puts in a lot of work. He's an instant speed sacrifice outlet, has incidental removal, and he still draws you cards. Yawgmoth is understandably pricey, but he just packs in so much value. If you'd notice though, a lot of these cards I've suggested are permanents. Card draw is the lifeblood of this deck, almost as much as sacrifice, and so it's important that card draw is something that will be repeatable for us. This deck wants to be humming along, offering up creatures to be able to refill our hand with answers, and setting up for when Sengir enters the battlefield. For what I don't play, as a general rule of thumb, I try to stay away from tutors. Ideally, between our card draw engines and our commander Tevesh Sat, we'll have enough to find whatever it is that we need. But if you do own an efficiently costed tutor, I'd recommend to put in maybe 1 maximum, mainly as a safety towards finding response rather than a win con. Hopefully, with the way we're building this, there should be multiple paths towards winning and not much need for tutoring. For tokens and fodder, we're gonna want to run a mix, meaning on one hand, we want to have sacrifice options in the form of recurring creatures. Nether Trader was recently reprinted and can be recurred for 1 black mana if another creature dies. Reassembling Skeleton is a really good card and is recurable at instant speed for 1 black and 1 generic. Skyclave Shade is also another good option, recurable for when we play lands. Sanitarium Skeleton isn't really a great card, it's actually quite slow and mana intensive, but if you don't have an option available to you right now, and maybe you can't find a Reassembling Skeleton or something, it's not a bad idea to run it. Flesh Carver is a card that's both a sack outlet and a creature we can sacrifice twice if need be. On the other side, we also want cards that come in with bodies. Lazotep Reaver is a 2-drop that comes in with 2 bodies, solid value there. Dreadhorde Invasion, while technically not a creature, gives us a steady diet like a budget Bitter Blossom. At the 3-drop, Weaponcraft Enthusiast comes with a pair of servos. At the 4-drop, Eldraine's Chittering Witch usually comes in with 3 rats and is a sack outlet herself. There are other options at the 4-drop like a Sling Gang Lieutenant, but I would favor running more of the lower costed fodder and minimize the 4-drop ones. So one ideal turn-by-turn sequence would be like turn 1 land, turn 2 mana rock, turn 3 play a creature that comes with a body, and turn 4 play Tevesh Sat. Not always gonna turn out that way, but you get the picture. At the top end of our curve, if we have the budget for it, Grave Tyrant is a can't miss pick. At 6 mana value, it's a 6/6 with Death Touch, a big body that comes with bodies and constantly churns out more bodies, just body, you know, just keeping up the whole pressure. The mid-budget option though is Endrixar Master Breeder. Honestly, I'm not the biggest fan because his ability means we'll still need to play another creature to even trigger him. A neat budget option though that I find works better is Abhorrent Overlord. It's a 7 mana value demon with a 6/6 body that has flying, and when it enters the battlefield, creates 1/1 harpies equal to our devotion to black. If we're running cards like Dark Prophecy, Kumbaja Witches, Ayara, and so on, this deck has high potential for harpies. However, even if this card only ends up making us like 4 extra 1/1 flyers, that's still some solid value to get. A powerful token option that I purposefully don't run is Bitter Blossom. Not only is it really pricey, I again find this a bit too oppressive to the point that it can overshadow what we're trying to do with the deck. Like, why bother playing Baron Sengir and sacrificing creatures when you have an endless supply of flyers starting turn 2 anyway? For Reanimation, this is something that's tricky because black has such powerful options that I personally don't find very fun or very fair in casual settings. For example, Reanimate is way too efficient, as is Animate Dead actually and its other iterations. So when selecting Reanimation options, I try to latch on to our ongoing sacrifice theme so that we don't just step into the zone of playing good stuff just because they're good stuff. Victimize is a sack outlet for 3 mana value and it gets back 2 creatures. Dread Return is a reanimation spell for 4 mana value, but it also has a neat sack outlet clause. Blood for Bones makes for nice value plays, allowing you to sack a token and bring back a couple of creatures that are either draw engines or removal, or they bring in extra bodies with them. Doomed Necromancer is a 3-mana value 2/2 creature that you can sacrifice to swap places with another creature in your graveyard. However, there is an old card that I do make the exception for when it comes to efficiency. Soul Exchange is a 2-drop reanimation spell. It's also sacrifice powered, which is neat, but I especially like it in this deck because Tevesh specifically makes Thralls, and this card has some synergy with Thralls. It also calls back the whole +2/+2 counter printed in the original Baron Sengir card, so it's just a solid flavor win in my opinion. For protection, the reason we run this theme is because powering up Baron Sengir is an investment. Creatures need to die for him to reach terrifying levels of power. Not only that, his mana value is 6, so it's not easy to constantly recast him from the command zone. A budget option for protecting him is Professor's Warning. Granting Indestructible lets Baron Sengir keep his counters, plus the mana value of 1 makes it easy enough to hold up resources to cast it. There are other budget options that grant Indestructible, albeit for 2 mana value. Oblivion's Hunger and Unlikely Aid are good options, and an older card, which isn't shown here, is Rush of Vitality, which provides some versatility with lifelink. Now if you have more budget, there are some solid staples like Swiftfoot Boots or Lightning Greaves that do a great job at protecting Sengir. The haste also lets him swing for potentially big damage or even lethal the moment he touches the board. Other options are Cauldron of Souls, which is a 5-mana value artifact that when tapped, lets you grant Persist to any number of target creatures. While that alone is a manual transmission way to blink your creatures in and out of the battlefield when you sacrifice them, it's also a way to keep bringing Baron Sengir back if he's destroyed. Don't forget that +1/+1 counters counteract the -1/-1 counters that Persist gives, so odds are you'll be able to keep bringing Baron Sengir back over and over again for as long as you can tap Cauldron of Souls. Commander's Plate is a 1-mana value equipment that gives Sengir protection from everything non-black. So for a 3-mana equip cost, not only will Baron Sengir get protection from blue-bound spells or white exile spells, it also makes him unblockable from decks that don't run black flyers. A card that is quite pricey now but can really pay off is the Ozolith. The Ozolith is a 1-mana value artifact that reads, whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. So it works like a save point for all your hard work, and at just 1 mana value, that's pretty insane. For UBP, these cards are usually dependent on metas. But if you don't know the meta, or you're coming in cold to a new playgroup, I suggest mainly including cards that give Baron Sengir some more evasion, or gives your deck a bit more redundancy. Trailblazer's Boots is a 2-mana value equipment that gives the wearer non-basic land walk, which essentially reads unblockable because who isn't running non-basic lands in Commander? Haunted Cloak is a 3-mana value equipment, and this is another haste enabler and trampler for an equip cost of 1, just in case someone has some chump flyers. Decks that are combat focused also generally need another win con, so we can run a mono-black game-ending staple like Gary the Grey, or if you've got the budget, other closers like Exsanguinate or Torment of Hailfire. I generally recommend only running one of these, and they're really for situations to end the game just in case the game is already running for too long. That said, I personally stay away from the Aristocrat package of Blood Artist or Zulaport Cutthroat and the like. I find that these end up being way more impactful than I'd want them to be, and they usually end up being the deck's go-to win con. My take on this is that it then kinda takes away the whole reason for us having the Dark Baron as our commander in the first place. I mean, I assume we chose him as our commander because we want to play him. Like we built our deck knowing that we probably didn't pick the most efficient commander we possibly could, but we chose a commander that we liked and that we wanted to play. For redundancy, we can go with Ob Nixilis Unshackled. He's a 6-mana value 4/4 with flying and trample. And Tutor Claws aside, he also gets bigger from the creature death and all the sacrificing we'll be doing. For a mid-range budget, we can go with Blade of the Blood Chief. It's a 1 mana value equipment that gives the creature wielding it +1/+1 counters for every creature that dies. I know it gives more counters if the equipped creature is a vampire, but you don't necessarily need to attach this to your Baron because trust me, Sengir already puts a lot of +1/+1 counters on himself organically. This is more for when he's not available, and it can promote a random creature or even a token into being a threat. For budget redundancy though, an option is Malefic Sight. It's a 2 mana value equipment, and the idea is to equip it to a creature before you sacrifice it. That way, the Scythe sees the creature dying, gets a soul counter, and the next creature it equips becomes even bigger. It isn't the most efficient of options, but at least it's still a way to have that built-in payoff for all of our sacrifice efforts. Since we'll probably have a couple of card draw engines running, we will likely draw into our pet cards. And here, I would recommend you playing something you normally don't get to. I personally play Opposition Agent, mainly because I pulled it in a PR, woohoo, go me! But I know Opposition Agent sounds really oppressive to some of you, but really it depends on your meta. The people I regularly play with generally don't run a lot of tutors, so this card isn't like the total home run. Maybe it'll steal a Rampant Growth or a Cultivate, then it'll be removed or sacrificed or something. And I know it doesn't sound like much, but Ramping Lands in mono black, pretty sweet. Another pet card I run, and really this is just because I have it, and also because I've played the game far longer than I'm willing to admit. Ritual of the Machine. It's a sack outlet, and for a mana value of 4, it gains control of a creature, which doesn't really exist in the black color pie anymore. Just a pet card, you don't have to run it, and with a price tag, I don't even recommend you run it. But the point I'm trying to get across is, you have space to play cards that'll hopefully express your playstyle and will allow you to play some black cards that you probably don't really get to play. Deck stats time! These are stats from a deck I've built, play-tested, and piloted in real multiplayer games. Cards that do multiple things will only show up in one category, which will be the category I really intended for it to. So for example, Priest of Forgotten Gods, yes it can do removal, draw, and ramp, but the main reason I put it in this deck is to be able to ramp. So in the ramp count, it will go. For this Sengir Sat deck, we're running 11 ramp spells, 14 removal, 11 draw spells, 9 for token and fodder, 5 for reanimation, 4 for protection, and 7 for UBP, plus 37 lands. And that's it! Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I'll try to post my own deck list in the description down below. As of this recording, EDH Rec only has Sengir the Dark Baron and Tevesh Sat Dumo Fools at about 45 decks, and Sengir is a standalone at about 7 decks. So I'm hoping we can get that number up because I think this deck is a ton of fun. It generates us a lot of value, it has some good interaction with the table, and it really lets Baron Sengir feel like the final boss that he should be. If this build or this build style resonated with you, let us know by tapping that like button and leaving a comment down below. For more content, please subscribe and we'll try to give you more play-tested builds geared towards interaction, synergy, and yeah, winning the game, but hopefully and more importantly, winning over some friends. But until then, see ya, pals!